So, Patricia, can we start now?
Yes.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you very much for taking the time to attend this LERA session today. My name is John Schmitt. I'm at the Economic Policy Institute, and I'm the chair of this panel that is going to include two of the three papers that were mentioned in the LERA ASSA catalog for the event today. We will start with a paper and a presenter, in order to make sure that we have enough time, and then we can have some brief responses from the presenters, and then open up the conversation to for questions and answers from participants and from any of the people who joined who aren't presenting or being a discussant today. We have a technical issue that we just learned about if you're just joining us, which is that we do not have the capability of sharing slides in this particular session. Maybe there'll be a change at some point during the session if they can figure out how to solve that at the technical end. And in the meantime, we just ask for people's patience as the presenters and the discussants make last-minute decisions about how they're going to make their presentations without any slides. Maybe drawing pictures for us across the screen or something like that. We'll see. So the format will be presenters will speak for 10 to 12 minutes, and then discussants for 8 to 10 minutes. As I said, we only have two papers, so we should be able to have ample time for discussion and possibly end a little bit early, we'll see. Let me start things off by introducing our first presenter, who is Christine Nguyen from Good Jobs First, and that will be followed by a discussant who is Guillaume Vermeylen from the University of Mons in Belgium. Let me pass that on then to Christine, and I'll mute myself.
Thank you, John. So I was thinking if for things that I really want to show, I'll just hold it up in my iPad. I don't know if we can really see it clearly, but because apparently I was thinking of putting stuff in the chat, but the chat is also disabled. So, all right. Well, so I'm Christine. I'm a senior researcher at Good Jobs First, and today I will be talking about my paper on how economic development tax incentives under my educational funding. So this paper doesn't really have a whole lot to do with job quality, but it's more through my work with our organization is works a lot with national unions like National Educational Association, and in a lot of places it's the teachers unions right now that are sort of spearheading the like revenue campaigns to get sort of, you know, money back from corporations that were given out as tax abatements. And so this paper basically, okay, let me see. So basically this paper uses the data on tax abatements, which is extracted from tax abatement disclosures from financial statements of local public school districts in the US in 2019. We gathered altogether 10,000 something PDFs and basically searched just tax abatements through all of them. And we ended up with about maybe a little under 2,000 school districts that lost at least some revenues to tax abatements, but these are but there's a lot of issue right now with reporting and compliance with the disclosure rules. So basically for this paper I picked 9 states that have reliable tax abatement data, and I collected data from the National Center for Education Statistics. and also on funding adequacy data collected by Dr. Bruce Baker at Rutgers University. And so the central question is, do economic development tax abatements affect educational spending? And my two outcome variables, actually, before I go into the details of the methodology, so what's wrong with tax abatements? So the two main issues that we have is, first, they don't always pay off. The companies could be not successful, or tax abatements weren't necessary in the first place to induce the development. So, and in either of these cases, we're just talking about lost revenues. And for school districts, there are two ways to get their budgets made whole. One is like these offsetting payments from the state, from cities, counties that entered into these agreements, from the companies themselves, through agreements and so on, or the school district can raise taxes, if they're the ones collecting taxes. But neither of these two solutions really offer like a lot of guarantee, because a lot of places have tax caps, and so it's basically they can't really count on it. So there are only just a handful of studies, dealing with tax abatements and school funding, even though it's like, very, very, very much connected. And a big part of that is because there was very little data on tax abatements. And so the data that we're using in the paper today it only started in 2017, so it's very new. And why is data important for economic development, right? So this is the kind of, so tax abatements is the kind of thing that's, that something we call a wicked problem in economic development planning. And it requires sort of multiple agencies to come together and start negotiating from the very beginning to make sure everybody's needs are heard. And in order to do that, we need to have good record keeping. We need to know at least how much revenues that we're talking about here, like how much revenue school districts are actually losing. So that's that's the kind of the first step. And and before this tax abatement disclosures thing, which is mandated by the Governmental Accounting Standards Board and applies to all local and state governments that use their accounting standards. And so before this thing went into effect in 2017, there's really very not a whole lot of ways to answer this question, right? But now from the financial statements, we can find out exactly how much school districts had to forego in terms of revenue for all the agreements that is subjected to. So agreements by other governments as well, which is most often the case for school districts. But school district only reports own portion. So basically so this is very useful, right? Because it kind of breaks down the cost of incentives by the affected jurisdiction, essentially. And it's what kind of allows me to do this kind of analysis of using local governments as sort of the unit of analysis. So so the method for analyzing this is linear regression with state level fixed effects. It's a fairly simple model. And I also interpret the results with some interviews I did with sort of experts in this space to just sort of paint a complete picture. And then there's school finance and demographics data to be used as controls. So I mean, you can't see it, but in the model we have about 1,000 or something units or observations, I guess. This is all districts that lost revenues in some 9 states, minus the outliers. So places like Hillsborough School District in Oregon, which abated $70 million just in 2019. That's huge. Considering the average is about less than $1 million. So those kind of things. So about 15 of those districts get removed. And the states covered are Georgia, Iowa, Louisiana, Michigan, Missouri, Ohio, Oregon, South Carolina, and Texas. So here's the table I will try to show here. But I know there's a lot of glare. But what it shows is kind of like the state level stats for the 9 states. And the columns are, sorry, I don't remember. Taxes abated per pupil, tax abated, the relative revenue impact. So that's just the tax abated divided by the revenues collected by school districts, and property tax dependence. So the share of property tax in overall funding. And the last column is one of the outcome variables at the district level. So it's the mean funding level, which is the actual funding level divided by the required funding level as estimated based on the regional wage variations and labor market characteristics. So just to notably, Louisiana has the lowest, which is 37.2%, which means that it's only, you can think of it as generally Louisiana's public school students are only about get the 37.2% of the funding that they actually need. Okay, so the two hypotheses is basically districts that forego a greater percentage of their revenues are 1, less adequately funded, and 2, they pay less in teacher salaries. And this is across all educational programs. And so I mean, I think in the Q&A section, if anyone needs me to go into detail about any of this, I can do it then. But for now, I'm just gonna skip the all the variable calculations because it's just kind of hard to describe without some kind of visual aid. But basically I mean, for people who have my slides and paper, you can maybe follow along. It's just on the last 4 pages of the paper are the 4 tables with the main results. So those pretty much cover everything. So to sum up the results from the regression models is that we find significant and negative association between tax abatement with both outcome variables. So basically, it means that both null hypotheses are rejected, and so school districts that that had to forego a greater amount relative to their revenues will be less adequately funded and pay less in teacher salaries. And this is the controls are district size, wealth, per pupil revenue, that's overall revenue sources, percent of state formula assistance, and as well as the 3 state level variables, which is the strength of the tax caps, because when you have stricter tax caps, it's harder for school districts to raise taxes to make up for the foregone revenue. State funding effort for education. This is, I believe it's educational spending out of gross state product, I think. So it's just it's kind of reflection of how much the state values education. And finally, the state GDP. And so from these interviews and focus groups that we did mainly in Ohio and New York, but also South Carolina and some other places, the sort of the general consensus, I mean, obviously the situations differ very much by place, because some places are hurt more, some places are not as affected. It just kind of really depends on a lot of factors. But there are maybe 3 points of sort of consensus. One is that tax abatements are in general harmful to schools. You know, it's not catastrophic because because in some ways, especially the state governments are sort of cushioning a lot of the harms. So through formula adjustment, through direct aid, through reimbursement to school districts, and state funding sources have sort of increased in importance in share of overall school funding. But property tax still remains the largest single source of fund, and so there's sort of a limit to how much state can really offset, and if the state is sort of offsetting it, then it's moving money from other places, and but the point is is still a sort of a net transfer. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize the time. All right, well, I'm on the last slide, unfortunately, but so basically the point is there's still a net transfer from public to private through tax abatements, and it doesn't really matter which public entity ends up, sort of picking up the tab. And also we found out that schools, the relationship between schools and cities is really important. So in smaller places where people kind of know each other and they talk with each other, and then usually tax abatements are very, very much very well carefully sort of given out, and with mindfulness about the impact on schools. Versus if there's some sort of adversarial relationship between the city councils and school districts. And so to sum up the central arguments of the paper is that tax abatements have a negative effect on K-12 spending, and tax abatements could potentially exacerbate educational inequality because poorer places tend to give out more tax abatements because they are more sort of eager for businesses to invest. And that's it. So if you have more questions after this, my email is chris, chris at goodjobsfirst.org. And thanks very much for listening. John, are you talking? You're muted.
Oh, thank you. It's not even technical problems, it's all human error on my part. That was great. Thank you very much. I know how hard it is to do this without the ability to show slides. We have as our discussion, as I said before, Guillaume Vermeylen from the University of Mons in Belgium. Go ahead.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Well, thank you, Christine, and good job and congratulations for the presentation without slides. That's that's an art exercise. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to read your paper. So to step back on a global overview. So this paper deals with basically tax abatements and their impact on school revenues. Globally, you show that tax abatements it could undermine educational spending, and therefore you suggest in the conclusion to limit the power of local governments in abating school revenues. Well, first of all, I found this paper really interesting, quite robust and well documented and very well written. So good job for that. And I really like the implications of the paper. So nice job. I have, of course, some points of attention, and I will divide them, my comments, into two main parts, the major ones. I think you should have to take them into account, and some more minor comments. Well, I will try to make it clear without slides. So my first comment is a major one, and it's related to the methodology. I think this is one of the main value added of your paper. You mix both quantitative and qualitative analysis. And unfortunately, the qualitative analysis just pop up at the end of the paper. I suggest you to create a global methodology into two parts. The first one, the quantitative regressions, and then the qualitative analysis through your focus group, because well, that's the main point of your paper. You mix both methodologies, and I think that it gathers more space in your paper. Well, therefore, you need to explain better and longer what happens during the focus group, what's the methods, and so on. This is a full part of your paper, and as I said, it deserves more space. Then a second major comment, it's still related to the methodology. You say that you decide to exclude 15 outliers from the analysis. And so I agree with that. And then you come back with them in the results. So my question is, why did you say that you are excluding them from the analysis and then you step back to these 15 outliers in the results? So I have basically two solutions. Either you delete them from the section 4, from the section results, or you change your way of introducing the outliers without, well, specifying that you are excluding them from the analysis, since, well, you keep them in your results. And finally, my third major comment, I'm not, well, how to say that? I'm not clearly buying the second hypothesis of your analysis. I think there one theoretical point is missing. Well, the fact that poorer schools means lower salaries and lower wages. Well, this could be seen as trivial. That's okay, but we need some more theoretical explanations, and this need to be clearly explained in the literature. If you do so, then you do not have the impression that the second hypothesis just pop up at a certain point of time. You have to explain that, and that will be clearer for the reader. So that's all for the major comments. Then I have a couple of minors. The first one is related to the regression. So you rely on linear regression on ordinary least square. But I have a question about the robustness test. You know that this kind of methodology can be biased due to time invariant characteristics, for example. Maybe you should run some tests, or at least you should mention this drawback in your conclusion. And also, I do not find any statistics related to the quality of the adjustment of your regression. For example, the R-squared data or something. It could be useful in order to check the results more specifically. And then finally, you mentioned that distressed localities, that they are more likely to offer incentives because they are desperate to attract firms and businesses. I was wondering, could we imagine the reverse? For example, tax abatements, they are mainly an attractive tool of the richest localities, since they can afford it. So you just take the reverse, and your analysis is quite different. I wonder if you ask yourself this kind of question. So that's it. I make it quick. So thank you very much. I hope it wasn't understandable without slides, but thank you once again for the paper.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great. I just got information from the ISSA support that it might be possible for us to have a technical solution to the sharing problem. I'm just going to interrupt.
John, screen sharing is on my computer now.
Great.
So I think for all co-hosts, it should be good.
On mine too.
Great, fantastic. That's a big improvement. If we can, as I said before, maybe jump ahead to the next presenter and discussant, and then have Q&A for everybody afterwards, just to make sure that we get through this with time for all. So our next speaker is Joshua Olabiyi from the University of Western Cape, and I will turn things over to him now. Thank you.
All right. Hey, good day, everyone. I believe you can see my screen. Can we see my screen? My slides? Yes. Right?
Yes, correct.
All right. All right. I just want to take us back to South Africa, because the information is about Africa. And we know that there are a lot of societal challenges which I've tried to itemize within this paper. And about 3 of them, I talked about poverty, and I also mentioned inequality. And the last one which is a racial discrimination that has existed over time in South Africa, not only in South Africa alone, but I think majorly in Africa, which has really tried to bring the development down. That's really tried to tame the development down. My topic, that's what bring about my topic, that I said I should write something about the employment, decent employment, and poverty alleviation for socio-economic development and its implication for the well-being of citizenry in South Africa. It's just about South Africa, and we know it's I will not say cliche now, but these are the things that we know, and these are the things that have been happening within South Africa. All right. I think I've introduced myself. I'm from University of Western Cape, South Africa. Then I'm also in the Department of Industrial Psychology, Faculty of Economics and Management Sciences. All right, let me quickly go to the introduction. But before the introduction, there is need for every government and private employers to adequately provide decent work. There is need for its own inhabitants, for its own population. And this is also important in such a way that we will see, even within the framework of work, we'll see that there are a lot of detrimental dimensions of which we can say this is just a form of indecent employment, and which I've tried to emphasize. From the viewpoint of human development, this paper tried to bring out the positive in terms of how we can talk about the material and the non-material social development that includes, because if you talk about decent employment, it will affect the health of that employee. It will also affect the social security of that employee if there is a decent employment. It will also affect the overall being of that employee. And that is why we will see that decent employment and a productive employment is even more very, very essential when we talk about workplace, the word of work. We cannot take out decent employment, because decent employment will affect these societal obligations of which I've mentioned. All right. And another thing that I've also seen, that I've also tried to gather in this research, coming back to South Africa now, we will see that there is joblessness in South Africa. There is joblessness in South Africa, and upon when this joblessness is being addressed, then we can talk about decent employment. That's one of my findings. That is, we need to address this unemployment before talking about decent employment. If this is addressed properly, then we can also talk about decent employment. You can know Africa, there's always problem. But I don't want to paint Africa with a bad image, but we all know what is happening in Africa in general. All right. This paper, the methodology that I try to use is the qualitative thematic analysis of the reported cases of the South African statistics of labor survey that is being done quarterly every year, and is there on my methodology. And this paper, just to wrap it up now, this paper contributes towards the decent employment in terms of addressing three societal challenges which I've mentioned: unemployment, inequalities, and poverty. All right. This is a synopsis of employment and unemployment pattern in South Africa in the last decade. We can know that the employment in South Africa can be grouped into two, which is informal sector and formal sector. It is being categorized as informal sector and the formal sector. And research also has shown that South African economic growth as demand for more skills worker than just skills. Why does the economic growth as demanded for more skilled workers? It is simply because the rate the economy is growing and the available job that we have to require what we know as skill employment. Because fine, people are saying there is no employment, but in the area of the skill sector, we have some certain employment that we can get there. But it is now the onus now lies on the South African citizen to try to upskill their skill in terms of trying to be able to meet up with the growth of the economy in South Africa. All right, having said that, we can see the statistics that I've gathered, that is, the informal sector has been growing compared to the formal sector, and which has experienced some stagnation due to existing labor market policy within South Africa. There are a lot of policies that is allowing, that is affecting majorly both formal and informal sector in South Africa. And we can also see that there was an overall decrease in informal sector. We can see from the first quarter 2021, we can see 19,000 job loss in employment. And we can also see from the second quarter 2021, we can also see the growth in the informal sector, which is about 184,000 jobs. And we can see that if we look at these statistics now, we will see that informal sector is gaining more ground than the formal sector. And that is why the government also needs to try to put up policies and strategies that will try to ensure that not only the informal sector that will be gaining ground, but also the formal sector. All right. Also looking at about these 5 sectors: the constructions, the community and the social services, transport, mining, and utility industries. All these things, all these sectors are put together. If we check the paper, which I cannot be able to say everything, we will see the statistics are there concerning how they've done within April 2020 to April 2021. Just the statistics. And due to the constraint that I cannot mention, then I've tried to work within that statistics, within that data that I get that from the South African statistics of labor survey. All right, this is the intersection now. The intersection of unemployment and poverty in South Africa. South Africa poverty can be attributed to unproductive and precarious employment. What are we simply saying? We are simply saying that why we have poverty in South Africa, it's as a result of unproductive work and precarious employment. And this problem is widespread among the Black South Africans, the uneducated, women and household, large family, and children. We can see, I mentioned about racial discrimination, which I've also talked in the paper, of which I cannot mention. All this have been put together in such a way that we will see that this problem is widely found in the Blacks, persons within South Africa. And also to combat poverty in South Africa, the government has tried several policies. The government has tried several policies, but due to the low economic growth, we can see that we cannot see the result of what the government is doing. Government has tried a lot of things, but due to that low economic growth is affecting the policies that government have put in place. All right, another statistics here, according to Poverty and Equity Report 2020, a total of 55.5, which is also the same thing as 30.3 million South Africans live in abject poverty. And also about 13.8 million people, which is about 25%, also experience what we know as sustenance poverty. Sustenance poverty simply means that people that live in a day and also eat from that what they live in a day. That means if they are not working that particular day, they may not be able to sustain themselves. All right, let me move fast now because I don't want to exceed my time. Implications of unemployment and poverty for socio-economic development. We can also see that national poverty reduction strategy does not address decent employment principles such as social protection and workers' rights. And these definitions has come out from the ILO convention. ILO has given decent employment for definition. They've given social protection and workers' rights. And we can see that this is not even enough. It's not even enough. What we now try to put forward is just that the social perspective on development will promote decent work, which effectively will affect the socio-economic development, which will also eradicate poverty within South Africans. All right. This is the method that I used, that I've said before, is a descriptive qualitative research method that was used, of which the data was sourced from the quarterly produced from the South African statistics, that is quarterly labor force survey. That is the data that I used to put up this paper. All right, the findings now. The findings is just straightforward. That is, the population of South Africa has grown exponentially, but the unemployment rate has also risen by 8.1%. And the employment rate has also decreased by 0.4%. Then the number have been boosted by discouragement of workers, which has risen to 5.9%. And this has automatically resulted in chronic poverty, one of most intricate challenges for South African workforce, despite numerous government intervention. And also, the current stagnant economic growth in South Africa makes it vitally important for policies makers to aim at creating a good employment that will evaluate and invest in the program that promote positive attitude towards a good way. Lastly, the employment rate has dropped drastically, as I've said before, and the unemployment rate continued to rise, which also has happened even before the COVID pandemic. This has been happening. And if this has been happening before COVID pandemic, that means if the COVID continues, we will see a lot of unemployment. There is going to be unemployment. And I still put the obligations to the South African government to try to put up a lot of policies that will accommodate all these socio-economic challenges in South Africa. And it has also been established that this unemployment or indecent work will always breed poverty in the society. It will always breed poverty in the society. Recommendation now. Decent employment that is in alignment with the ILO principles can help society to combat the challenges of poverty. And the second one, that is a well-considered policy of government to empower the informal sector, can also help in the employment creation effort of the South African country. There's also need to redouble the effort to ensure that the underpinning consideration for policy enactment to redress the historical imbalances and inequalities of South African employment environment must be totally pursued. And the last one is that the provisions of decent employment should be vigorously pursued by the government in order to eradicate or avert poverty. All right, thank you very much. That's my presentation. And I thank you for giving me the platform to speak.
Thank you very much. We have as our discussant, Brandy Edmondson from the University of Minnesota. Brandy?
Sure, 1 second. Let me pull this up for you guys. Okay, so thank you so much, Joshua, for that wonderful presentation. I'm honored to be able to be here to discuss this paper. This is a very new topic for me in different contexts in general. So I found this paper very interesting to read. A little bit about me. My name is Brandy Edmondson. As said, I'm from the University of Minnesota. I'm studying work in organizations, which is an interdisciplinary program. I'm a 4th year student and I focus on labor economics in that program. Okay. I'm a race and discrimination scholar, so it was really interesting to learn more about the history of South Africa and how segregation and discrimination affected the economy, especially given the similarities to the US context, which is what I'm typically studying. So just a little bit more about the paper. Before jumping into my comments, a key premise of the paper was that job creation cannot meet the population increases. So there aren't enough jobs, period, much less decent jobs to go around. Something that I didn't know was that South Africa has one of the highest unemployment rates in the world right now. Over a quarter of South Africans are unemployed. And then Joshua also demonstrates the ways in which decent employment or decent jobs can alleviate many of the issues that exist in South Africa. So these include poverty, unemployment, inequality, as he discussed pretty thoroughly in his presentation, and can improve these different aspects of society in South Africa: health, education, social security, food security, overall well-being. So overall, I thought this paper was very well motivated. The contribution, one of the major contributions of this paper are the suggestions for how to lower poverty rates and inequality through decent jobs that were developed using current data as well as the past history of Africa, or South Africa, sorry. Again, the motivation was awesome. Joshua does a great job of motivating the topic using both a moral imperative as well as an economic perspective. Throughout the paper, that was just something that really came across, was just the why is this important, especially given the different statistics and just history that you gave about South Africa. So the context of South Africa and the explanation and motivation for why you were looking at South Africa specifically was excellent as far as this paper. As far as my insights towards the paper, I divided them into 2 different categories: job supply as well as labor supply. From the job supply perspective, I agree with Joshua that decent jobs should be of a suitable skill level for those in need of jobs, and that all demographics should have access to the new jobs created. However, I did have some questions that I thought could be addressed in the paper or just thought about as you move forward with this paper. So I am very new to the job quality literature, so forgive me if these are obvious, but a question that came to mind was the idea of automation. So you talk about how there are needs for jobs that fit the skill levels of the unemployed, but a lot of these jobs could be taken over by machines. And so my question is, what impact could automation have? And would it affect one demographic more than others? And also just from an economic perspective and for organizations, how can we motivate employers to want to keep people doing these jobs rather than moving to automation? Another question that I had, we talk about in the paper, you talk about in the paper, these different, or why decent jobs are important. But as someone very new to the literature, I kind of had a question of just what are these types of jobs? You mentioned some general industries, but maybe some unique jobs that could be created to meet the needs of the growing population could be helpful for really novice readers like myself. And then you discussed the pandemic at the end of the paper, but I just thought maybe going a little bit more into that could be helpful, again, for novice readers like myself. So the last question that I had as far as job supply is just how does that pandemic affect what constitutes decent work? So does the qualification for what's considered decent decrease because we know that there's less safety in general with the pandemic going on? As far as labor supply, We must ensure that the jobs created match the skills of the unemployed and vice versa. So also looking into how to make the unemployed eligible for the jobs that are created if they are higher skilled jobs. So a question that crossed my mind is, how do we develop the skills needed for the new jobs? So I asked, what skills programs exist or can be created to fill any skills gaps? Can developing talent help to reduce discrimination and job segregation? Then in regards to the pandemic, again, has COVID affected the labor supply in any way? I would assume so, and you do discuss that, but maybe just going a bit more into detail about the effects of people possibly pulling out of the labor supply or possibly needing to or wanting to go into the job market more. I'm not really sure what's going on there, but it would be nice to have a little bit more insight into that in the paper. And then lastly, are there any characteristics of the population that lend itself more to preferences towards casual or temporary work? The reason why I asked that was because when I was thinking about COVID, I know that some people in the US are pulling away from working in certain jobs because of safety concerns and also different obligations toward their families. So I was just wondering if maybe COVID or anything else was possibly causing individuals to want to go into casual or temporary work, or is it like in the paper demonstrated that that's just what is available now? So that's all of my comments. Again, I really enjoyed reading the paper, and I don't expect you to have the answers to all of these many questions that I have. Again, I'm very novice to all of this. I have tons of questions, very interesting, but it's just a pleasure to be able to read your work and give my insights. So thank you so much, Joshua. That's all for me. Thanks again.
Thank you, Brandy. That was great. As I think some of you who were here right at the beginning know, we do not have the third paper for this session. So we are going to switch now to allow the paper presenters 5 minutes to respond to any of the comments that they received from the discussants. We can start with Christine, and Joshua, if you'd like 5 minutes as well afterwards, we can do that. And then go to Q&A with the whole group. And I think at this point, it would be, we have plenty of time for a robust conversation afterwards if there are questions and answers. But let me turn this over now to Christine for her response to the earlier comments from the discussant.
Thanks again, Guillaume, if I'm saying your name correctly. Thank you very much for taking the time to read the paper and provide comments. And I agree with all of them. Definitely, I will spend some time. I'll add the specification test. I will add the sectional limitations. And you are right that the qualitative section was really just kind of tagged on the last minute. So I'll work on that as well. So one thing I do want to respond to is at the end you mentioned that why I say poor places would abate more. So yes, so bigger districts of course collect more revenue and can therefore have more revenues to abate. So all the measures used in this study are either per pupil or like with the main explanatory variable, I use the abatement as a percentage of sort of abatement relative to revenue. So then my reasoning for thinking that poor places would just basically abate a greater proportion of its revenue is because it kind of they need that shot in the arm to stimulate the economy, and they are also less choosy about the type of companies that they want to give awards to. And that's just kind of based on our a lot of the day-to-day work that we do when we engage with the local organizations and groups, and it's like typically just wealthier places are there just they're more picky about who's coming to their community, and so I was hoping that assumption would would be correct. I could actually maybe test that. I think, which might help support the paper. So thank you very much for raising that point. That's a really great point. And it was interesting because like when we're speaking with the Kansas City Public Schools, which was mentioned in the paper, they created basically this web page on just incentives where they showed that the district that are serving mostly Black and Hispanic students, the city abated their revenues about maybe $2,000 per student, which is very, very high because nationally it's about 500 per student. So and the nearby wealthier white suburbs only lost like a few dollars per student. But so that those are the kind of evidence to support this. But of course, that's just a very small sample size. It's not like a pattern. It's just it's just for Kansas City, Missouri. So but I think there's some in other papers that I've written on this. I think there might be evidence to support that poor place indeed abate more, whether that's an absolute amount or per pupil or relative to your revenue. I think that the latter two are very similar.
All right. Let me
Great.
quickly attend to Brandy's question. The first one that I picked from your analysis, thank you very much. Then trying to be able to compare the South African labor force with the US, I think I'm also going to consider that. It's fine. I love that. It's a contribution of which I'm going to improve on the paper. Then the second one, which I also picked from your question, is that how automation has affected the employment itself. Yes, a lot of layoff, a lot of they are sacking people, they are laying people off, fine. But one thing needs to be clear here. There is no amount of automation that can drive out all the employees. The employees they still need employees to perform some functions. No matter the robotics, we still need some certain operations to be performed by the employees. Fine, it does really affect the numbers of people getting recruitment into the organization, fine. But we cannot take human beings out. Fine, automation is good. And the third one is how the COVID has affected job or decent work itself. Fine. A lot of papers on COVID, a lot of talks on, that's why I've tried to deviate. And that's why if you look at my topic, you cannot see anything COVID. I just try to put the COVID thing at the conclusion. I don't want to talk about COVID because I said in my conclusion, I said, even before now, even before COVID, this has been happening. The joblessness have been there, the unemployment have been there. And that is why I've tried to restrain myself within what I've put out. But based on your contribution of what you have said now, I'm going to improve on that. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you. Thanks to all the paper presenters and to the discussants for a great conversation so far. I think at this point we can open things up for questions and answers. And we have a small group here, but I think probably the most sensible thing is to raise your hand using the raise your hand feature in the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. And I'll, or send me a chat saying you want to be in the queue, but we have such a small group. We can probably either just go with the raising of hands or even just jumping in, but let's start with raising hands. Anybody have any initial questions, comments? Jamie?
I just had a question for Joshua. I only know a little bit about the South African economy, but I was wondering how employment is measured there just from a practical sense, given the fact that the informal economy is so large. How do they keep track of who's working or who's looking for work?
Thank you. In South Africa, the informal sector is not, there is no laws or regulation that is guiding informal sector. That is why on my paper, I call it a precarious employment. These are employments that are not guided by law. And that is why most of the contracts are informal. They don't follow the normal procedure put in place for formal sector. And that is why you can see that's why it's so large. There's not, in fact, for instance, now, if you are bargaining for a wage that's, say, let's say 15,000 rand, and that position, you ought to be earning about 30,000 rand. Due to the fact that there is no rule guiding that conduct, then for them to give you 30 rand, they will prefer to give you 15 rand because there is no any law that is binding it. There's no any law guiding it. And that is why, fine, the government is trying to regulate, but it's not working because the real employers are not following. Fine, they call them to meetings, they call them to programs, they call them to policies. But at the end of it, when they go back to their informal settlement, they do what they like. They don't follow the structure. They don't follow the formal structure. I don't know if I've answered your question. Okay. Okay.
Great. So I'm going to just go with people who've raised their hands. And I know Andrew Weaver was going to be a discussant today, so I'm going to give him the first shot. And then after that, Kimberly.
Great. I just had a question for Joshua on, so, you know, on informal employment, and I've done a little bit of work in Egypt on this, but I'm curious in South Africa, is most informal employment in firms that are predominantly or mostly all informal, or how much of a, you know, how much does it occur that there are formal firms that employ some formal workers, but some informal workers?
All right. If I can go by my statistics, I'm trying to get it. I'm coming. Okay. For instance, now, from my statistics, I have informal sectors, which is non-agricultural. And apart from non-agricultural, I also have some, for instance, now we have about one certain law that regulates the informal sector. But as it's regulating the informal sector, it is not really helping. For instance, now, let's say somebody who is trying to help someone like an housemaid. Then housemaid, for instance, now, government have a general law for them in terms of when they have issues, they go to government, they report to government. But even having them report to government that this employer is not treating them well, is not treating them fine, there are little that the government can do, because don't forget that even if you go to the government, when you come back, you are still coming back to the employer, and the employer have the final say. And that is why even sometimes when you go to the government, you will lose your job. You are at the verge of losing your job. And that is why you could see that a lot of intricacies that needs to be balanced within the South African sector in terms of informal sector. And that is why in my introduction, I said that it is the responsibility of the government and the private sector and the private employers to try to regulate these things, to try to put these things. For instance, now, I have a lot of people, for instance, there is a student that is doing a part-time job, that's supposed to be my student. Then on a holiday, he went for a job. Then after doing that job, they refused to pay her, saying that they don't, what will you do? Then the student came to me and I said, go back to them, go and tell them that you will report them to the CCMA. CCMA is the Commission for Mediation and Arbitration in terms of industrial conflict. And as soon as the employer listened and said, you are going to CCMA, the employer quickly made payments to that student. And the student now come back to come and say, thank you, sir, for giving me that advice, because they know that if the government come back to them, they're going to be paying more heavily. They're going to be paying more heavily. And that is why when the government is not there, government will not always not be there. But when they are not there, there's nothing the employees can do that. And that is why I always advocate for employees, because the genesis of labor relation starts with the benefits that the employees will get and the benefits that the employers will get. And that is a conflictual interest, and which will always cause problem within the employment relation.
Next question from Kimberly. I'm sorry, I can't see your full name, but. Is anybody else having trouble hearing?
Sorry, I had to call in and I forgot that I called in, so I unmuted on the Zoom call instead of my phone. I was saying, my full name is Kimberly Eisen, but I was saying, Joshua, I really appreciate the comparison you made with the housemaid in the previous question, because I feel like it's not too dissimilar from what, we see in other countries, including the US, where, there's some government regulation, but the employer in many cases has like the power, the upper hand, and it's difficult for the employees to make decisions on when to like voice their concerns and try to fight for the rights that they have. So that was very interesting. But my question was for you as well, piggybacking on that whole informal economy concept. My family's from Guatemala. So when I go visit them, I do see a lot of that informal work, most of the time just being, doing your own business at home, making food, selling and doing laundry, things like that. And I wondered, hearing your argument, if the reason why it's difficult to keep track of how the informal economy is doing is because of the just massive number of families who are doing that work. So almost like it's impossible to keep track because of how many people rely on it. So then my question being, if that's how you feel.
Right. Hello?
Yeah, my question being, if that's what you think is happening in South Africa as well, if that's one of the challenges that is faced when keeping track.
Yes, keeping track. Yes. That's as I've said it before. That is, it's not the government is trying, but the employers, they know how to play their tricks. For instance, now let me give you another instance. For instance, now talking about trade unions. There are laws before trade unions can go for a strike. But the law says that if a trade union wants to go on strike, you need to give a 48-hour notice to the employer. And after giving 48 hours notice to the employer, then the employer will acknowledge that you can go on strike. The question is, what if the employer refuses to acknowledge that notice? That means you can't go on strike. And if you go on strike, that is called an unprotected strike. And when you embark on unprotected strike, this simply means that you're going to lose your job, because the law says that when you embark on unprotected strike, the employers have the rights to do what? To lay you off, because he has not acknowledged. And why is the employer not accepting or not acknowledging that notice? It's simply because he wants to deal with the employees. He wants to deal with the employees. And that is why all these things, It's just on employees. Employees suffers.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I would just like to thank the paper presenters and the discussants for great presentations and for coping with some technical challenges at the beginning. I think it went very well, and I think we had a great session, and we should be able to follow up with emails. I think people should have emails for participants in case there's anyone who wants to exchange further information. But again, I think we can end a little bit early without that third paper. Thank you all very much for particularly to the paper presenters and the discussants. So thank you. Great. Take care.
Thanks for chairing too.
Thank you.